So this morning's talk is titled Miaozong's Disappointment. And Miaozong is an interesting Zen master, one of the great women Zen masters. I was introduced to her in Mary Sullivan's class, Zen Women. And this teaching that I'm going to talk about, that she's involved in, is a teaching that touches on a very important teaching in Buddhist teachings. In the Buddha Dharma. It's a very important teaching. It's one that we hear a lot, one that we don't really hear. And so getting another perspective on it, I think, is helpful. So first I'm going to read to you the story, a koan basically, and then I'm going to give you some background on Miaozong, because she's an interesting figure. So the story goes like this. Master Jianyan Yuan said, I can just set this up very quickly. Miaozong is visiting a Zen master, and the master that she's visiting is Master Yuan. So when she visits, we have this exchange that they have, this dialogue. Master Jianyan Yuan said, as a well-brought-up lady from a wealthy family, how can you be prepared for the business of a great hero? Miaozong replied, does the Buddha Dharma distinguish between male and female forms? Yuan questioned her further. He said, what is the Buddha? This mind is the Buddha. What about you? Miaozong replied, I've heard of you for a long time. I'm disappointed to find that you still say that kind of thing. And that's where we go. That's our story. Pithy little exchange. Miaozong is already showing some deep understanding here, even if it doesn't sound like it. Even if it sounds like all she's doing is being impertinent. We'll talk about what it is that she's doing. But first, like I said, I wanted to talk a little bit about her. Zishao Miaozong. She's born 1095 and passed away in 1170. So really, her Zen practice is in the period of the great song masters in China in the 12th century. She's from an educated family. This is important, and they're very well placed. So they have a place in government. It's an important place. And because of that, because the fact that the family's educated and well placed, as a woman, she has expectations about what her life is going to look like and what it is that she's going to do. So she has a very prescribed life. How it is that she came to eventually be a monastic and be a Zen master, in the book Zen Women, Grace Shireson, the author of the book, she theorizes that the husband had probably passed away. That's how she figures that it was that Miaozong was able to be a Zen master. I read a biography of her in Buddha Dharma. There was an online article from the magazine Buddha Dharma about her. Then they have a description of what her life would have looked like as a well-educated Chinese woman. And they said, had she done what was expected of her, she would have lived confined to the women's quarters of family compounds. First, that of her natal family, and then that of her husband's family. Upper-class women were never seen on the street in China and were forbidden to play any role in public life. They were not to interact with men outside the family and were certainly not brought up to challenge men about matters of importance. And Chan practice in the 12th century involved challenging men. So to me, this is very interesting because you see how Chinese culture, and many cultures will do this, isolate the women, put them such they can't even go out into the street. They have to live in women's quarters, and she has to do that again, both with her natal family, that's the family she was born into, and then when she marries her husband's family, she's going to be separate in the women's quarters. So that's a pretty prescribed life that she had, that she was looking toward, but she did not live. Grace Shireson suggests that one of the ways that perhaps was suggested that Miaozong had another route available to her was that she had a sister-in-law, an older sister-in-law, who herself had taken up the way of Zen and became a renowned teacher herself. I forgot to write her name down. You don't happen to remember it, do you? It was a very interesting story, though, because first in Zen women, you get the story of the sister-in-law, who's a little bit less well known to us, and then we get the story of Miaozong. And so what Shireson suggests is that this sister-in-law's life actually at least suggested to both Miaozong and to Miaozong's parents the possibility of success in a life practicing Zen. And eventually, Miaozong went to study with and became a Dharma heir of Dahui Zonggao, who lived from 1089 to 1163. They lived about the same number of years. And he was a very important figure as well. He's a Linji master or Rinzai master. And the practices that he put into play and his understanding of Zen were actually impactful on all of Zen practice, but in particular on Rinzai practice. Now it's important, one of the things that's important about this lineage is that Zonggao, or Dahui is how they'll talk about him. Dahui not only made Miaozong his Dharma heir, which is kind of unusual for male to female Dharma transmission. He not only did that, which tells you that there's something that he saw in Miaozong, which we're going to see Master Yuan sees it as well. There's some understanding that they see that she has. So not only does he make her his Dharma heir, but he also wrote about her in his Dharma instructions and spoke about her accomplishments in his Dharma talks. So he wrote about her and talked about her. So what that means is when he gives these Dharma talks, there his students are recording, here's Dahui's teachings. So she actually shows up in the literature, in Zen teaching, because of her teacher, because the students are writing it down. She herself did have a collection of her teachings, discourse records, but it's been lost to time, which is sad because I have a feeling they might be very interesting. But we do have her because she was referred to by her teacher and he talked about her and her accomplishments. We also have some other writings of hers. She wrote poems that were responses to Buddhist sutras and koans. And we have those. It's 43 poems. Some of them are collected in a book we have here at the Dharma Field Library called Daughters of Emptiness. And Jed Larson actually referred to that book in his day-by-day Zen class and read some of her poems, and they were interesting. So that kind of gives us an overview of Miaozong, but now I want to take us to what led her to this first meeting with Master Yuan. So like many women of her time, because of how prescribed a life they had, and it was unusual for a woman to go to a Zen monastery, they actually could. They were allowed to do that. Of all the things that they were not allowed to do, one thing they could do is go to a Zen monastery. But for the most part, they were just left to themselves. So any questions of a spiritual nature, usually just kind of wrestle with on your own. And so there are stories of women who came to take up Zen, who first had some kind of insight on their own. And Miaozong is no different from that. And I don't know how they know she was 15 years old, but it's the age that they give. When she was 15 years old, she actually had an insight. And the insight was she'd asked this question. She said, when we are born, where do we come from? And where do we go when we die? And these are really simple and profound questions when you think about the way that we normally take our life to be. We're born, we come into existence, and we die, we're going to go out. And I know I asked this question myself. This is why I don't know where the 15 years old comes from, because this sounds like one of those great questions that children have that plague them, that they just kind of go, it's interesting. I just started reading a memoir by Alison Bechdel, who is a lesbian cartoonist, really wonderful cartoonist who wrote a book, Fun Home, that was turned into a musical. She lived in the Twin Cities for a while. She actually, I don't know if you knew that, but she kind of achieved her fame writing a comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For, and she did that here in Minneapolis. Yeah, she's I really like her. And she was writing about being a little girl. And looking up in the sky and thinking about infinity. And she had the same kind of thoughts I did, which is, you're thinking, oh, somebody had told her, she didn't say this, but I know this is how I got the question. She had the same thing. Somebody must have told her space was infinite, right? So then you sit there and you imagine infinity. You imagine the universe going on and on and on. And at some point you get to like the edge of the universe. And then you realize, no, it goes on farther than that. And as a child, it kind of blows your mind. And so the way she draws that is she's looking up at the sky and she's thinking that same thought, and then cut to the planet Earth, and there's like one of those thought bubbles with an exclamation point in it, And that's kind of the thing that happens with Miaozong as a girl. She has this question: where was I before I was born? This is a great question. I seem to be here, and I seem to always be here. So where was I before, and where am I going? And she actually has an insight, which tells me she can't. You come to an impasse when you ask those kinds of questions. You can ask parents, but if you're a kid and you ask parents those tough questions, you know that usually you get some kind of brush off. Stop asking me questions. I got to make dinner. Or because I said so is another good one. If they say something, you keep asking, finally they go, because I said so, right? So Miaozong undoubtedly came to an impasse with those kind of answers, with conceptual answers. And then, interesting enough, she didn't tell anybody about it. This is the story, because she just thought it was a commonplace understanding that she had. She wasn't exposed to Chan or Zen teaching or Buddhism, so she didn't even know that she had this question. She came to some kind of insight, and she just went, yeah, didn't make much of it. So she gets married, as is expected of her, and she finds married life, and this is the quote, insipid. And because she found married life insipid, and think about, again, the prescribed life. It's almost like, I was reading about women in America in the 19th century. And, they're basically not really allowed to do too much. And that includes thinking. Don't do too much of that now. You just be a woman. That's all you really get to do. So one can see the insipidness in this. So she starts taking up a spiritual practice in a way of her own. She engages in meditative practices. She engages in abstinences. She abstains from things. At the age of 30, and again, I don't know where they get this age from, she finally hears of Chan from her husband. And so she's intrigued by this, and she wants to go visit a Chan master. And as I said, one of the things she's allowed to do as a woman is to visit a temple or a monastery. So she does. She visits Master Yuan, and that's the exchange we have, is her first visit, supposedly, to Master Yuan. And Master Yuan, I couldn't find anything. Did you find anything about him when you were?
I didn't look.
Yeah. I didn't look, and I didn't see anything about it, because the star here is Miaozong. She's the star of this story. So all we do know about him, though, is that he's a master. He's not just a run-of-the-mill teacher who doesn't really know what he's talking about, right? He's a master. And again, now this person comes to him. Perhaps, this I don't know if the encounter was that she was sounding him out to see if she wanted to study with him. That I don't know. But we do have somebody who wants to know about the teachings and seems to have some understanding herself, which is reflected in this dialogue. So what a Zen master will do in a situation like that, when a student approaches them, perhaps at the interest of studying, they sound the student out in a way. They'll ask a question that's intended to get a sense about where the student is in their studies. It's sort of like we've been reading Everyday Zen by Joko Beck, and she tells this remarkable story at the beginning of the book. She had been a music student. She talks about studying with this piano teacher who could take a mediocre student and make the mediocre student a pretty darn good piano player. And she said she herself was not a mediocre student, she was pretty good. As a piano player, she was pretty good, but not a great piano player. And she finally had the opportunity to study with this guy. And she said he didn't say anything to her. He had two pianos. He just sat down at his piano. He played 5 notes and he said, play this. That's what Master Yuan is doing. So Joko Beck does play the 5 notes, and he goes, nope, play it again. He plays it again. Nope, 5 notes. Nope. So he's sounding her out. Master Yuan is sounding out Miaozong with his question. He says again, as a well-brought-up lady from a wealthy family, how can you be prepared for the business of a great hero? And what he means by the business of a great hero is just how can you take up this practice? This is a practice that takes some courage. It's a practice about entering into the world. And again, if we think about a well-brought-up lady from a wealthy family, we know that one of the things that happens is she gets isolated right away. So in a way, his question, he's asking a couple things. He understands that she's been isolated from the world. And so her understanding of it is going to be pretty limited. It's going to have what it is the culture allows her to see. And so he's asking in part, how can you, somebody who's been so removed from the world, are you prepared to take up this practice that is about, we'd say, stepping into this world, or living this world, or realizing this world? Are you ready for that? Because those of us who take up this practice, as you know, you face some difficult things when you take up this practice. The first noble truth, which we'll talk about again a little bit later in my talk, but remember, it's dukkha. It's dukkha, it's suffering, or discontentment, or unease, or the wheel being out of kilter. That's existence. And existence is, and the way I'm talking about it right now, is this sense that we have, that we were talking about earlier. Where was I before I was born? The sense that we're born into this world, and then we're going out of this world. And once we have that sense of existence, and this is where we are, then pain arises with that, suffering arises with that, confusion and dis-ease, unrest. So this is hard to face this, to be with this. Usually what we do is we distract ourselves, or we tell stories to try to help explain away the problems we're having. This practice is to keep peeling that away, to get rid of those security blankets that we think are going to protect us, but we know ultimately won't do that. So we asked again, are you prepared for this business? But related to this question of the fact that he's asking about somebody who's been removed from the world is this question about gender. There's a historical question in Buddhism. Can women take up this practice? Can they wake up? Can they be enlightened? And his question is touching on that or not. It's a historical question. Can women take up this practice? Grace Harrison points out that Buddhist scriptures, following earlier Hindu beliefs, assert that a female form must transform to a male form to achieve Buddhahood. So we have that in some of the scriptures. Yeah. What's that?
In the Lotus Sutra.
In the Lotus Sutra itself.
Yes.
Yeah. That's an important sutra. In the Lotus Sutra, we have this. So a female form must transform to a male form. There's actually another story about an earlier Chinese female Zen master, Master Moshan, that touches on this. I just want to read her story as well. So Moshan taught, looks like she was a 9th century Chan master. That really goes back. That goes back to the golden age of Zen, the Tang dynasty. A monk comes to the monastery where Moshan teaches, and he declares, I love it when students do this. So the students do the same thing. They do the same thing. They're sounding out the teacher as well. Is this a teacher I want to study with? That's what this monk does. He comes into this monastery where Moshan is the head teacher and declares, if there's somebody who's worthy, I'll stay here. If not, I'll overturn the meditation platform. It seems kind of cheeky. So if there's someone here who's worthy, I'll stay here. If not, I'll overturn the meditation platform. And then they have an exchange, and I'm not going to go through that because it's kind of lengthy, but they have an exchange where they're kind of sounding one another out. And then the monk finally asks, who's the master of Mount Mo? In other words, who is Moshan? He's asking this of Moshan. And Moshan said, without the form of man or woman. The monk shouted, ah, with frustration. And then he asked, why can't it transform itself? That is, why can't it become a man? Moshan replied, it's not a god or demon, So how could it become something else? Right? It's not a thing. You'd say a god or demon that could transform itself, but it's also not male or female. It's not man or woman. So how can it become something else? What is that it they're talking about? This is something that we're going to get back to in our discussion between Miaozongs and Yuan. So the monk was satisfied with her reply, and he ended up staying with her for several years. But this question about whether or not women can actually take up this practice, this goes back to the beginnings of Buddhism. There's a story that I talked about this spring, this past spring, when I gave a talk on Mother's Day about Mahapajapati. And that was the Buddha's stepmother, who raised the Buddha from basically the moment he was born, and who was also his aunt. And Mahapajapati, initially, Buddha hadn't allowed women to take up the practice. He didn't allow them in the Sangha. But his stepmother, Mahapajapati, really wanted to take up the practice. She could see there was something special here. She understood it, and she probably also, in her own culture, felt the insipidness of married life, right? So she wanted that thing that she saw that Buddha had. And so she would ask him if she could be part of the Sangha. And the Buddha repeatedly turned her down. Even once after she took a group of women and they walked hundreds of miles to get to where the Buddha was practicing, he still turned her down. And this was troubling to Ananda, who was one of Buddha's students, one of his great students, also his cousin. And Ananda finally just put it to Buddha, and he said, can women attain enlightenment or not? And the Buddha conceded that they could. And so at that point, he allowed women into the Sangha. Though it wasn't that easy. All kinds of prescriptions were put on women about what they could and couldn't do as they were taking up this practice, far more than were asked of the male students. But I would say that Yuan's question, this question about a well-brought-up lady from a wealthy family, how can you be prepared for the business of a great hero? He's actually getting at the heart of this question of gender. And so what's happening when we talk about, can a woman study Buddhism or not? Can she become enlightened or not? Is this question of ability. This question of, are there people who can become enlightened and people who can't? That's really at the heart of the question he's asking. In this particular case, the way that that's determined is by gender. There are all kinds of ways that people talk about that. Is this person capable of waking up? Yuan's question really kind of gets at the fact that that question is overlooking the fact, can I become Buddha? Can I wake up? It's overlooking the fact that we're already Buddha. It's already overlooking that. You can't become Buddha. This gets back to the story with Moshan. It's not a god or a demon. How can it become something else? You don't become Buddha. You're already Buddha. But the question that Yuan's asking, it's kind of got that assumption at the heart of it. Again, as part of his sounding out, Miaozongs, right? So he's asking about this ability. Are you able to wake up? Are you able to become Buddha? Again, the sense that we can't is rooted in a misunderstanding that doesn't see that we're already Buddha. It doesn't understand that point of view that says, can I wake up or can I? That every moment is an opportunity to realize the Buddha that we are. And we often think, when we think about this, we don't realize that every moment is an opportunity. We might think of something like, think about that great hero. Are you prepared to, prepared for the business of a great hero? And your answer might be, not me. I'm not prepared for it. And we hear that great hero, or we hear stories about the awakened. We hear stories about bodhisattvas, and we tell ourselves, yeah, I can't do that. I'm not enlightened, or I'm not there yet. Now, I've heard people say that. I'm not there yet. I kind of hear what they're talking about, but I'm not there yet. Well, then you're not hearing what's being pointed out. They're telling you you are there yet. You are there always. Now realize it. The one that I heard that was the most startling, that was directed at me, was, you're holy, I'm not. And I just was like, holy? You know, and on one hand, when you encounter something like that, somebody who says, I can't do this, I'm not there yet. You're holy, I'm not, I can't do this. Compassion arises, you know, for the person, because you understand where that's coming from. That is coming from that dukkha I was talking about. That comes from a sense of separation, that sense that I am this being and I can't possess this thing that's called Buddhahood, or I can't possess this thing that's called awakening or enlightenment. And in that way of conceiving what it is that's taking place, there's dukkha. That's dukkha. So when we hear people say that, you know, there's compassion arises there because you recognize that as dukkha. You see that as confusion. You see that as the fruit of the confusion. People are buying into the sense that they're separate from reality. There's some other dimension to it too, though, that we can think of just in terms of we find ourselves saying that, yeah, I'm not good enough for this, or I don't practice what I preach, perhaps, is the way it might come out. Well, you know, when we say that, I can't do this, this is impossible for me to do. In a way, we're relieving ourselves of the responsibility of taking care of this moment, is what we're doing. So yeah, I can't, I'm not up to it. Here's a good one. That's for better people than I, you know, I can't do that. And all you're doing is, well, here it is. You know what I mean? You have to take care of it. So are you going to take care of it with true understanding? Or are you going to try to shirk responsibility for what it is that's showing up? Because here it is. And again, compassion can even arise with that insight, because here can hurt. In fact, often when we say, I can't do that, it's because there is hurt there. There is suffering. And it's hard to be with that. Again, that's the work, the business of a great hero, is to be able to face that, to be able to be that. And that is difficult, or it can be difficult. It doesn't have to be difficult. That hurt, or that pain, or that suffering that we encounter does not have to devastate us, does not have to overwhelm us, depending on how we see it. If we see it as just this is what's showing up, this is what's unfolding, it doesn't nearly have the same impact as it does if we think that what's taking place, if we think that what is showing up is an impediment. And that's the way we usually think of it. Oh my God, if this wasn't happening, well, it is. So take care of it. But when we think of it as an impediment or something that's destroying our ability to be happy, then that's suffering, then that's dukkha. So in the face of that question, this question about, that's kind of getting, asking, do you distinguish? Do you make this distinction? Do you see an idea between those who can be awakened and those who can't? Miaozongs replies, does the Buddha Dharma distinguish between male and female forms? Now, to me, it's interesting, first of all, what she does is she does not engage in conceptual conversation here. She doesn't start explaining herself to Yuan. And I think we have a tendency to do that, right? So, this is tough business. You've had this isolated life, you know, so kind of refined lady like you, can you take this up? Well, you know, and then you get into the explanation about why you can't, why this is the thing you can do.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Why this is what we can do.
No,
Right?
what did she say?
Oh yeah, I'm going to get to what she says, but she says, does the Buddha Dharma distinguish between male and female forms? She doesn't do that. She just refuses to. Instead, she asks a question and it points us right back to reality. So this is already showing some understanding from Miaozongs. She doesn't do the thing that we usually get caught up in, which is just to get caught up in the conversation at hand. She asks a question that points right back to reality. Does the Buddha Dharma, and the Buddha Dharma's truth, the nature of reality, does it distinguish between male and female forms? And again, you can see that Miaozongs is pointing back to this discussion between Buddha and Ananda with that, and to the difficulties pointed out with something like the Lotus Sutra, that you have to transform into a male in order to be able to wake up, or what she was seeing in the practice and teaching of Buddhism in China at the time. So one of the things she's doing, pointing back to reality, is she's pointing out but she understands that there's no problem here. The problem might be with you, right? It might be with this understanding you have that a woman might not be may not be capable of taking up this practice. Because monasteries did not allow women to stay at the monasteries. So she could go and attend talks and lectures, but she was not allowed to spend the night there. Now she did, my understanding is when she visited, might have been a later teacher, could have been this teacher as well. There was another room that the abbot stayed in, and that's where she was actually, they had guest rooms there. She was allowed to stay there. But she's aware of that. She's aware that that's the nature of this practice. She sees that there's difficulty about this gender, but she also seems to understand that in that difficulty, there's a profound confusion. And it has to do with this confusion about this distinguishing, this distinction, these conceptions that we have, these conceptualizations. So her question points right back at reality because it's really saying, does Buddha Dharma, does ultimate reality really make these distinctions between male and woman, between ability to wake up or not wake up? So she says, does Buddha Dharma distinguish between these forms? So in response to Yuan's initial sounding out, and his initial sounding out was coming from a relative place. It was coming from a sense of, well, you're this kind of person, can you hack it? And she comes from the absolute. Her response comes from the absolute. And I think that is a profound moment in this discussion. So now Yuan's going to sound that out. So she's speaking from the absolute, but is this speaking from the absolute, or is it still speaking from the relative, but an idea about the absolute? So that's his next question. So he asks her, what is the Buddha? This mind is the Buddha. What about you? All right, so now he's got, what is the Buddha? This mind is the Buddha. What about you? Where do you fit into all this? So again, he's testing out to see her speaking from the absolute. Is that the absolute or ideas about the absolute? We get ideas about the absolute. Just talking about the absolute promotes ideas about the absolute. So we have ideas about what enlightenment is, about what awakening is. We might think of them, for example, as good things. It's good to wake up. It sort of reminded me of that Mel Brooks joke from History of the World that he used to walk around. He was one of the sections where he was the king of France, and he'd walk around and say, it's good to be the king. So it's good to wake up, good to be enlightened. We think of that. We think enlightenment or awakening, that's good. And the thing that's not good is our usual confusion that we have. Dukkha. Remember, I was just talking about dukkha. That's suffering. That's that disease. It's that mind out of kilter. Well, that sure sounds bad. That's the way we'll interpret it. So that's the bad thing. And then enlightenment's the good thing. So we can very easily make that kind of distinction, even though the teachings never say that. That's what we hear. That's how we interpret it. And in that, you can see then awakening is, or enlightenment is something that we have to get. It's something that's not here. I'm not there yet. You know, I don't know what I am, but it sure ain't awakened, you know, that kind of thing. So we make it awakening or enlightenment this thing that's outside of us. That's a goal that we're going to be moving toward. So you can already see that how easily we do that. And you hear it all the time. All the time. People talk about delusion being bad, enlightenment being good, enlightenment being something they don't have yet that they're going to get. So these are common ways that we get confused. And so he's, again, just testing out to see if what her understanding is. Is she caught up in these ideas? Or is she really coming from some kind of insight into what's taking place? So he uses this odd, you know, sometimes when you get these koans, you have people speaking in, it feels like they're speaking in code, you know, because with the response to, does the Buddha Dharma distinguish between male and female forms? Does this make sense? Then the next thing he says is, so what does the Buddha distinguish between male and female forms? What is the Buddha? The mind is Buddha. What about you? It just sounds like something got lost there. And what Yuan is doing is he's pointing to a teaching. He's pointing to a well-known teaching. And it's from Chinese Pure Land Sutra. That was actually pretty well known at the time. Was popular in Zen circles, actually popularized by Baso, the great 8th century Zen master, Chan master, who had many Chan masters as his students. So he had used that. And I have a little story about that. It said that one day Damai, a disciple of Matsu or Baso, came up to Baso and asked, "What is Buddha?" And Baso answered, "The mind is the Buddha." You know, so the mind is the Buddha. And that's what it is that Yuan is referring to, this exchange. What is the Buddha? This mind is the Buddha. This mind, the mind that's asking this question. What is the Buddha? That mind is the Buddha. When we wake up, when we ask ourselves, when we're that little Alison Bechtel lying on her back, thinking about infinity, over Miaozongs, as a young woman asking herself, where was I before I was born? Where am I going after this? When we start asking these questions, right there is Buddha, right there is awakening, right in that question. We're seeing through our delusions. We're sensing that there's something that's awry. So Yuan is saying, what is Buddha? This mind is the Buddha. What about you? He's saying this questioning mind. You're coming here, interested in taking up these studies. Just that is the mind. And you could say that really what he's pointing to is all is Buddha. Are you Buddha? And we'll hear that teaching. Normal tell us, you're Buddha. And then we go, am I? Am I Buddha? What's he talking about? I don't get it. I'm not Buddha. I'm not there yet. Right? So he's asking this question. All is Buddha. Are you there yet? Are you there yet? Now, what's interesting, Miaozongs, typical of her in this exchange, she doesn't get caught up in a dualistic answer. So she doesn't go, well, depends on what you mean by Buddha. Or she doesn't say, well, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. She doesn't do any of that. She, again, makes a kind of gesture that is pointing back to reality. She says, I don't know if you remember this, because I've heard of you for a long time, talking about Master Yuan. I've heard of you for a long time. I'm disappointed to find that you still say things like that. That's her reply. She didn't get caught up in that. What are you talking about? She didn't get huffy to walk out. This guy thinks I'm not Buddha. He thinks I don't get it or whatever. No, she just says, I've heard of you a long time. I'm disappointed to find that you still say that kind of thing. I feel like right there, she's pointing to the fact she understands Master Yuan's illusion. She's telling him, yeah, we've heard this before. Baso's teaching. Yeah, we know that. Oh, ho-hum, old news. Because what you can do, if you encounter a teaching like that, what might happen is then you've got a student who knows the teaching, and then they just continue the dialogue, or they might continue the scene, or they might quote something else that's a commentary on that. And so suddenly you're in this realm of just quoting scripture at one another, as opposed to expressing true understanding. So she doesn't engage with that. She just acknowledges the fact that she understands this is a teaching, and I thought you were better than that. You're a master, and here you are just quoting the same old stuff. Heard it, been there, done that. She doesn't mean that to be insulting, right? So the way I'm saying it, it sounds like she's insulting this master. She's not really insulting the master. That is her way of expressing the fact that she recognizes the illusion, and she's not going to get caught up in the trap of this question, which has still got that dualistic sense of understanding. Are you Buddha? Basically saying, quoting Baso, everything is Buddha. And then, are you Buddha? Well, shucks, you can easily get caught up in that. She doesn't get caught up in that, right? So she shows in this exchange her awareness that there's still distinction in Yuan's question, that there's still the question that started out their exchange, that the assumption that's at the heart of that is still there. The difference between the awakened and the not awakened. Now, it sounds like their exchange actually went longer than this. version of this that I have, which is from Hidden Lamp, which is an excellent book of teachings of women. The lamp is hidden, so it's these teachings of women Zen masters. It only had that little section I read. It reads a lot like a koan and really says all that needs to be said. But in the Buddha Dharma profile, apparently they report anyhow that the exchange is a bit longer. And at the end of it, Yuan said, so just to let you know, like he understands what's going on here, just like she understands what's going on there. That this is a testing of understanding. This is kind of seeing where the student and the teacher are. He says to her, you are a real lion cub, which suggests that she's on her way to be a full-grown lion. And that lion is referring to one who takes up the business of a great hero. Right? The lion, we've heard of the lion's roar, the one who's expressing this fearlessness and confidence, the business of a great hero, and one who isn't caught up in misgivings or doubt, but trusts in reality, trusts in the perfection of this, trusts in our Buddha nature, in Buddha nature. So he's hearing in her at least a sense of maybe a mule, a lion's a mule, but I think we hear a little more than that. Now it's interesting, I had just been, my husband's family had just been in Africa, I think this past fall. So I saw some pictures of lions. They got close enough. A lion walked right by the side of their truck they were walking in. And lions have really loud roars, really loud roars. And I looked it up and it has something to do with the way their vocal cords are structured. So they're kind of held in place. So there's not a lot of like wasted vibration. It just goes into that roar. It's loud. So this expression, this lion's roar in Buddhist teaching, this is loud. It can't be ignored, right? And this again is what Miaozongs is displaying. She has fearless and confidence. We can already see that in this exchange. And that's because she has clarity about the situation. She understands what was at the heart of all of the parts of the questions that Yuan was asking her. She understands that we are already Buddha. She understands that. She doesn't just hear it and know it and she's heard this teaching. She actually understands that in her heart. She understands, what it is that we might push away, that you are Buddha. You are Buddha. Mary had asked a question a few weeks ago in her talk, a question that had come to her. What can she put her trust and confidence in? That's it. You are Buddha. Trust this. And that's what I think Miaozongs points to with her life, so much she had to struggle against to get here. But it was that confidence in what was taking place that I think she's expressing in this exchange. So that is my talk this morning. If you have any questions or comments, I welcome them.
Did she continue to study with him?
I tried to figure that out and I couldn't. Do you know Mary? Did she study with Master Yuan? I think she was still married, so I don't think she
Yeah, I
could.
don't think so.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think so.
yeah. The other teacher she studied with, she was older, so. It's a good question. I did look that up. I was like, what happened? Whatever happened there? Anything else? Yeah, Mike.
Just a clarification. In the exchange, when she says, what is Buddha, mind is Buddha, what about you? Who was saying which one?
That was the master saying that.
Oh, okay.
That was the master, right? So she had said that, she had actually asked that question, does Buddha Dharma show up in male or female form?
Right. But he said three sentences. What is Buddha, mind is Buddha, what about you? The teacher said that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep, so that was him. What is Buddha? This mind is Buddha.
And then he said,
what about you?
Did he say, are you prepared to be a great hero? And I did that right.
The business of a great hero. And that's, again, that's just taking, taking up this practice. Yeah, hero. Right. And again, it's hero, as I was pointing out, because this can be difficult work, right? This is, and it's a hero because taking up this work is the work of saving others. You know, it is heroic in that this practice is to save all sentient beings. And you do it by looking in the face of the dragon, you know, which doesn't have to be scary, but we have that story about that guy that was so enamored with dragons. He had all these, you know, drawings and paintings and sculptures of dragons. And when the real dragon showed up, in reality, it scared the hell out of him. It was terrifying. We can get all of our ideas about life. They can put life at a distance and make it palatable. But when it really shows up, can you look right at it? Can you be that? You know, yeah. So there's the hero. And in doing that, then we're saving all sentient beings, waking up, being awake, being the awakeness we are actually. So yeah, hero. All right. Well, thank you all for being here this morning.